have another foreign contribution coming from 𝔸𝕸𝕦𝕠𝕟 in the United States of America, specifically from the state of Michigan. We welcome forensic psychologist Shawn Wygant to give us his comments.
Howdy, folks. My name is Shawn Wygant, and I work with Dr. 𝔸𝕦𝕦𝕠𝕟, and we work together in a company, PsychLaw. And one of our missions is to help educate mental health professionals and judges and lawyers and other legal professionals on the contours and things that are involved with parental alienation dynamics that we see in the cases that we're involved in. Another aspect of PsychLaw is we're involved in funding and researching a portion of our profits towards publications such as the International Handbook on Parental Alienation Syndrome, the Handbook for Parental Alienation, which came out in 2013, and of course our latest publication, which is Parental Alienation Science and Law. Today, what I wanted to walk us through is third-party alienation, which has been addressed previously. And so I want to go through a couple of the cases and things that we've seen in our own practice across the United States in 42 different jurisdictions. So first of all, third-party alienation, as most of you probably know, is when a professional participant falls into the trap of believing the alienating parent and the program's child and making the egregious mistake of contributing to the problem. And so one of the things we look at is how common is it? I think we have to have a grasp on how often this occurs. And from out of the 185 cases between 2013 and 2020, this is just a sample of cases that I worked on with Dr. 𝕸𝕠𝕠𝕟. 78% of those cases involved third-party alienators. And then the other statistics are 59% were alienating mothers, 39% were alienating fathers, and 2% were hybrid cases. And I think that's worth mentioning because one of the other areas of our research that we published was how often this occurs and what are the dynamics, I mean, in terms of gender. Are mothers more likely to alienate, or are fathers more likely to alienate? Or what is the split? And so the big study that we did from 1985 to 2018 came out basically 65% of the alienators were mothers, 35% were fathers. But the caveat is 80% of all cases, custody cases, the custody goes to the mother. So when you actually tear apart and break down those statistics, statistically speaking, fathers are more likely to alienate given the opportunity. So the opportunity to alienate, as you know from the research, is access. Having an alienator will gain exclusive and proprietary control of the child's mind, and often that peregrinates and turns into proprietary and exclusionary control of every aspect of the child's life to exclude the other parent. So when you have custody that is solely within one parent or the other versus a shared custody, the opportunity for alienation increases. So I thought I'd run those statistics by you pretty quick. So what is kind of at the heart of third-party alienation? Well, it's the perverse family drama triangle that formulates within the family system. Mother and father get a divorce. There becomes a parent-child coalition. There's a rigid triangle that's set up, and where we have, what this looks like in terms of family systems theory. Jay Haley came out with this perverse triangle that he noticed in clinical practice, and it's where an alienating parent will set themselves up as a rescuer initially, identify their child as a victim, and then portray the targeted parent as the villain. And of course, this grows out of a maladaptive reaction by the alienating parent to the separation and the hurts that went within the marital conflict. So some parents who alienate their children, they develop this sort of cognitive dissonance within themselves. So they're very uncomfortable with the idea that that they may have been a part of the problem in the marriage. So they have to externalize blame and project it out into the other person. And then part of that dissonance is, I love that person, or I used to love them, and now I hate them, but why do I hate them? And if they can't find a legitimate reason within the reality of the relationship, they'll start to manufacture a reason. Otherwise, they'll feel guilty and they'll feel hurt inside for being hateful to someone that they really don't hate. That's the dynamic. And so they resolve that by self-deception. They start deceiving themselves into believing, I hate this person because they did all these things, and they can become frivolous and then turn into dramatic false scripts. And children pick up on this. So this is kind of how the cognitive dissonance starts in the alienating parent and then takes up root through programming and brainwash in the alienated child. So in terms of the way this looks, there's an enmeshment between the alienating parent and the alienated child, and of course emotional cutoff, first from the alienating parent to the targeted parent, and then secondly, once the child becomes programmed, there's emotional cutoff. So in third-party alienation, one of the ways, if an alienating parent is not successful in gaining proprietary and exclusionary control over the child, they will elicit the help of surrogates, advocates, who then become surrogates and take up a part of the alienator's story and latch onto it. And this can be a therapist, a guardian ad litem, a CPS worker, a police officer, a medical doctor, a custody evaluator, or a magistrate, or even a judge. And so they end up becoming a rescue team, all enmeshed within the story, whatever it is, whether it's an exaggeration of real bits of truth that went wrong in the marriage or the conflict within the separated or divorced couple, or they could be completely fabricated scripts. So I just want to go through a couple different case examples real quick. This is an older case, 2019, but it's illustrative of what goes on in third-party alienation. So you have a mother, Deb Geisler, falsely accused the dad of sexually abusing their son, Eric, as a tactic to gain sole custody after all of her other attempts at making wild accusations of domestic violence failed. Child Protective Services investigated this for 2 years and found out these allegations were false, but the mother had been doctor shopping and taking her 2 boys, Eric and his younger brother, to various psychiatrists, and there ended up being 4 that were involved. And the therapist and the mother were also successful in brainwashing Eric and his younger brother into believing that they were sexually abused by the father. And then the mother put the idea in Eric's head that dad needed to die. And so she left a loaded gun in a nightstand. And when dad came to pick him up, she had given him 20 milligrams of Prozac. And he goes out and kills his father. So here's an excerpt from the prosecutors describing why this child killed his dad.
Why did this boy kill his dad?
The short answer is because he was angry. The simple answer is that he had become so alienated from his dad, and he, in his mind, dad was really the source of all of his problems. And if you eliminated dad, you eliminated the problem.
Do you think Deb Geisler played a role in this?
There's no question that she created the poisonous environment that led that boy to shoot his father.
And I always, felt like if she didn't put the gun in his hand, she at least put the thought in his head.
Okay, the most important part of that is Deb Geisler wouldn't have got any traction on her allegations if the therapist hadn't endorsed it to the child. So you have another person in a position of authority telling the child, your dad did all these terrible things to you, just like your mom said. And so therapy becomes brainwashing sessions. So it becomes endorsement by a third party. That's third-party alienation. It's a very powerful, insidious, negative force and a black mark on the practice of psychiatry and psychology. And so I think it's important that we don't miss that, because if we're going to prevent these things from happening, we need to call it what it is. So here's another case, a 2015 case that I was involved in. Father and mother were never married, engaged in a custody dispute. 4-year-old daughter, the mother says, not the dad, not at dad's house, not at preschool. Nobody else saw this child being anxious. Well, mom told the therapist that the daughter's anxiety was due to sexual abuse. She just thought that. So she tells it to the therapist, and then the therapist engages in 18 months of sexual abuse play therapy with puppets. And the therapist notes show, and it's all scripted out, the therapist takes the daddy puppet and the daughter puppet and tells the child during play therapy how the daddy sexually abused the daughter puppet. That's programming. That's brainwashing. And here's John Stossel reporting on an experiment where a group of children were taken to a regular pediatric examination. And at no time during the pediatric examination did the doctor go anywhere near the child's genitals. But then at the end, put a smiley sticker on the child's stomach. And here's what happened.
Brooke had this pediatrician add some extra steps to his routine physical examination of preschool kids. He measures the child's wrists with a ribbon. He puts a little label on the child's stomach, and he tickles the child's foot with a stick. Never does the doctor go anywhere near the child's private parts. Then, right after the exam, using an anatomically correct doll, Brooke asks leading questions about the doctor's exam.
Can you show me on the doll how Dr. Emmett touched your vagina?
No, he didn't touch my vagina.
He didn't.
The child tells the truth. But just a few days later, Dr. Brooke and the child's father again ask about the doctor's visit. It's a different story. Before Brooke has a chance to even bring out the doll, the child shows how the doctor had strangled her with the ribbon.
He did this.
You put that around your neck?
Tight.
Like that?
He did it tight. So tight.
And watch what happens when the doll's brought out. She's asked to explain what the doctor did that day.
So what did he do?
He put a stick in my vagina.
He put a stick in your vagina?
Yeah.
Just like that?
It gets even more violent. She claims the doctor hammered the stick into her vagina. Then she shows how the doctor examined her.
He looked where?
My honey.
He did look in your hiney?
Of course, none of it is true.
So what happened to these children in this experiment? They were led to believe by the therapist, third parties, that something bad happened to them when they were at the doctor's office. And so the children incorporated it into their memories, and through source monitoring errors, were unable to recall that the source of that information wasn't true. It didn't happen. It came from the therapist, and they believed and developed false memories. Now, so here's another case in 2012 of how a third-party alienator, in a case we were involved in, this is a mother and a father engaged in a 7-year custody battle over 4 children. The 12-year-old son was taken to an EMDR therapist for, quote, trauma that the father says the child experienced, but the child didn't say that he had experienced this. And the stepmother as well. And they had convinced this boy, the father and the stepmother, because they had custody and the biological mother did not. And the stepmom told the EMDR therapist that JM's aggression and trauma, quote, trauma, was due to an incident that JM, when he was 4 years old, that his mother had tried to kill him with a knife. And even though he had no memory of the incident and the mother denied that it happened, the therapist indicated to JM and told him weekly to imagine how it happened. So through this EMDR therapy, this child was programmed to believe that his mother held a knife to his head when he was 4. And this gave the child a legitimate reason to hate his mother, even though it never happened. So a really famous experiment was done with children where they were told over a course of 10 interviews that they got their hand caught in a mousetrap and they had to go to the hospital to get it removed. And after several interviews, the children began to say that they remembered getting their hand caught in a mousetrap and provided rich details of how it happened. And despite being debriefed after the experiment by the parents and by the experimenters, several children continue to believe that it really happened. Here's one of those children.
Let me ask you, did your father tell you something about the mousetrap finger story?
No,
Is it true? Did it really happen?
It wasn't a story.
It
really happened.
It's really happened? You really got your finger caught? It's really happened.
Yeah.
And so there was other experiments with doctored photographs for adults that found that 50% of the participants of adults who had saw a photograph of them taking a hot air balloon ride when they were little, even though it was fake, formed false memories. And then I think I'm running out of time. How much more time do I have? So why does this happen? Okay, here's another excerpt from another case. The Cassini Rocky case in 2013. This is an example of the third-party alienators who had become involved, elicited by the mother, had convinced the oldest boy and the younger children that their father was violent and sexually abusive. And this is an excerpt from how the 17-year-old had come to realize that what his mother had told him was false.
Sandra's strongest proof was always the testimony of her children. But today, one of those children has recanted his story. Oldest son, Nico.
Get up there, Nico.
That little boy from the home videos. And the same son who later posted that damning Facebook message accusing his father of physical abuse. He now says all of that was a lie, and that it was his mother who pressed him into believing it was true.
She started to say, like, your dad's this bad guy. Your dad, like, hurt you when you were younger. And I was like, what? What are you talking about? I don't remember any of this. Well, it happened to you. It's like, and at the time I believed it because you listened to your mom.
He says he was 15 years old and he couldn't understand why she didn't want him to see his father.
I felt really close to my dad, and I was still confused on what was going on. Like, why wasn't I seeing my dad?
Nico now says he never saw his father physically abuse his mother or his brother and sisters. As for that Facebook post, Nico says Sandra stood over him while he typed, coaching him on exactly what to say.
When I look at my writing then and what I wrote then, that doesn't sound like me, and I feel really bad.
He continues to tell us that.
So why does this happen? So why do third-party alienators engage in the alienator's false dramatic scripts and play the part of rescuer and become a surrogate for an alienating parent's drama? Well, one of them is confirmatory bias, and that's something, it's a tendency for a preconceived idea of facts of a case or a story that they hear first. And typically, if the first story we hear as human beings tends to be, we sort of look for information after that confirms what our first impression is. And that's something that mental health professionals need to understand, that confirmatory bias, in order to prevent that from happening, we need to engage in hypothesis testing and look for any and all evidence that says something either happened and any and all evidence that says it didn't happen. Another mechanism of why this occurs is the scapegoat mechanism. And another is programming and brainwashing, lack of education and training in the application of the scientific method. And what should we do about it? One of the things that I think would be important is to help, if you're a mental health professional or legal professional, find out what the science says. There's decades of research of how false narrative scripts are manufactured within an alienating parent-child relationship that can peregrinate into include a third-party person or alienator. How false narrative scripts can be induced through court-ordered therapy, and what happens to alienated children when they are exposed to false abuse narratives by professional participants. Another thing that we can do about this is legal and mental health professionals ongoing training specific to parental alienation, the dynamics of it, how it occurs, what it looks like. And so if there's ongoing training, I think it tends to mitigate and help reduce this. I know that I engage in 4 training seminars per year in my local area with family therapists, and it helps a lot. Another area of what we could do is have forensic mental health professionals who are specifically trained in parental alienation dynamics go out and be a GAL. Instead of having a lawyer take that position, go to the judge, go to the county or the jurisdiction you're in, and start serving as GALs, even if you have to do it pro bono. If the county doesn't have funds, go ahead and do it. Serve in that capacity, because you'll see the court begin to turn around judge by judge. The judges start to get it, and they start to understand that I'm getting the best information and the most accurate information about what's really going on with this child from this guy over here or this lady over here, because they're a forensic mental health professional and they're going to give me the straight and skinny, and I'm going to feel more comfortable about making decisions. So we want to be advisors to the court, and we want to be able to take up positions that are guardian ad litems for the children instead of sitting back and being just therapists. That's one of the things that am I running out of time? Okay, I'll wrap it up. So court orders is another way. Protect children from the risk of emotional and false abuse scenarios. And therapeutic interventions, treat the family as the client, engage all family members, and de-triangulate any victim, villain, rescuer triangles that are there. And that's it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Shawn. That was a very extensive contribution on third-party alienation. I take the panel comments. So, Dr. Ivan?
Well, I mean, third-party alienation is very serious, and actually it's the most common form that continues to sort of increase parental alienation. I mean, parental alienation starts between the parents, but very often it gets worse, not because of the parents, it gets worse because of third-party alienators. And very often these third-party alienators are the state, the organs of the state. There has been even cases in Strasbourg whereby, for example, having 10, 20 criminal cases to enforce access is itself a breach of human rights. That's third-party alienation, because the court ought to take action immediately, not 2 years, 3 years after. I mean, I'm very worried with the recent law that has been passed to Parliament, because now reporting abuse is going to become very easy, and that's not necessarily a good thing, because in parental alienation, very often the victim is often labeled as the abuser. And I am afraid that we might be getting it wrong. It may be a step back rather than a step forward. That is why it's essential, and there's no need to study, just get it done. Get parental alienation recognized as a form of domestic violence.
Dr. Cynthia?
I perfectly agree with Dr. Ivan. In fact, unfortunately, most of the times the court is helping, is being one of the third-party alienators, not only the courts, the authorities, but also the lawyers. We are abating this violence. And in fact, in relation to the reporting, the aggressor, in this particular case, will invent and fabricate stories which need to be acted upon, but the delays, obviously, will be against the minor. So in this particular case, I completely agree with Dr. Ivan. It's a step backwards.
Mm-hmm. So thank you very much, Dr. Cynthia, Dr. Ivan.